Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world in 30 answers. Discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I'm sitting with Karen Daenen and William Allen of Two Shepherds. We're here in Sonoma County in the Russian River Valley. Welcome, Karen and William, and tell us a little bit about Two Shepherds.
So Two Shepherds is a small winery that we started in 2010. So this is our 10th vintage. We focus primarily on Rhône varieties, but we have branched out and some of that. We have our own vineyard with 2 varieties we planted, and then we lease and source from vineyards all over the North Coast with interesting varieties. Very old world style in our production. So we make kind of more classic European style wines, low alcohol, high acidity, no new oak, etc., which reflects both of us having European backgrounds.
Right, because you were born and raised in Bermuda.
Correct.
And Karen, you are Belgian.
That's correct. Yeah.
But both living here in Sonoma. So what is your total case production?
It's right now, or what we're gearing up to for this harvest. Those are 2 very separate questions. So right now we're about 2,500 cases. We're gearing up for 3,000 this coming harvest. And I think we're pretty lucky in that we've been able to grow by leaps and bounds every harvest. So that's pretty exciting. William started off in 2010 with
175 cases.
175 cases. So 9 years sometimes feels like a long time, but sometimes doesn't. And it's pretty remarkable, I think, to go from 175 cases to 3,000 in just under double-digit years.
Yeah.
So
pretty impressive. And where can we find your wines? Are you in markets across the country and beyond?
We were actually all direct until just over a year ago. And so now even in California, now we distribute in California. So you can find our wines pretty widely in the Los Angeles market, San Francisco, other parts of the Bay Area, it depends. And we now also distribute to New York, Washington, D.C., Virginia, about to do Toronto, Montreal.
Go Canada. We'd like to distribute to other places as well as internationally, but unfortunately just the tax rate and us being a small winery is prohibitive to that. Yeah. But it is exciting when we go to wine fairs and events and we get interest from all over the world. I think it shows a lot about sort of the style of wine that we're making, our philosophies. And so while we can't, because we're often sort of hand-strung with the legalities and paperwork, it is exciting to see the interest from all over the place.
Well, I'm interested in these wines, so I'm glad they're available in California. Tell me, for the both of you, being not necessarily born in the U.S. and having a different upbringing, what is your first memory relevant to wine?
So for me, it goes way back, actually. So I was lucky that my parents were really interested in wine. And so when I was 6, they decided that they wanted to go to Bordeaux on a family vacation. And my brother and I had no idea what we were getting ourselves into. My parents thought it would be fun to bring 2 a 6-year-old and a 7-year-old to a chateau across Bordeaux. I happen to really like the dank smell of wine cellars, and I think something about the smell got under my skin. And I have pretty vivid memories of being a very voracious 6-year-old and ringing bells in the chateaus and running through the caves and getting the smells. What we were not excited about was that we were also in the back seat of a small car that was increasingly filled up with wine boxes, and my brother and I had no place to sit. But aside from that, it was a really good introduction.
What about you, William?
My story isn't nearly as glamorous. Although my parents drank European wines, it was like Mateus Rosé and Cold Duck sparkling. Over time, my dad learned to appreciate Bordeaux varieties, but I had visited, living on the East Coast after I left Bermuda, and I visited Napa and thought that was okay. But then my first trip to Sonoma was really discovered the Russian River Valley, and that was what It took me a long time, but then in a pretty short period of time, my life changed dramatically. It was a deep impact in Rush River Valley. From the very first time I came here, I said, this is the place I'm going to live. It took me 10 years to make it happen, but lo and behold, this is now where we live and grow grapes and make wine. So.
That's right. And so once you got past your first memory of wine, what would you say is one of the most memorable wines you ever drank, and what was the occasion? Oh, and is it the same wine?
Yeah.
Well, I think the wine that you brought on our first date was pretty memorable.
Yeah, but that's way after our first wine. You're going to have to redo this one.
That's true. That's way after our first
This is the one question that we neither of us have a good answer for. Like, I don't have an epiphany wine at all.
But there are a lot of wines we like.
Yeah, no, it doesn't have to be an epiphany per se. I can ask that question again and then...
Yeah, well, okay. This is... Oh, well, just... you're still rolling, okay.
Traveling the world abroad, and you've had the privilege and pleasure to travel other places and drink other wines. What are some of the best foreign wines you've ever drunk?
My favorite wine region still is and people is the Northern Rhône. So although we continue to explore, and there's still parts of France, which is really where my wine heart lies, that we need to get to. But I keep repeatedly visiting the Northern Rhône at the expense of other places. I love the people. I love the rusticness. Some of the Northern Rhône Syrahs, well done, and certainly some of my biggest epiphany winemakers are all in that region.
I think the other region as well, we got to go there for the first time 2 years ago, was the Languedoc. And I think there it's really interesting to see the enterprising nature of folks and everything that they've got going on. It's also just stunningly beautiful that they have water, and then just a few feet away, these head-trained old vine Syrah and Carignan and Mourvedre. And it was really exciting to see that and meet a lot of people. It's a place I think I'd like to go visit some more and understand some more.
Mm-hmm. Now you've traveled and you live here in the U.S. When traveling around, of all the populations, who would you think drinks the best in terms of quality?
Well, I'm biased, so I'll say the French, but I'm sure the Italians and the Spanish people I visited would take point with that.
I think it's a really interesting time in human just enjoyment of wine, which spans millennia. In that, I think the people, well, certainly on the East Coast, you get a lot more imported wines, and so there's just a plethora of choice there. So I would say, I think even New York and some of the places where you get a lot of the imported wines as well as wines from the United States is a real mecca. And something I'm a little bit jealous of sometimes because of the choice that they have. On the flip side, I agree with William. Like, if you go to France or Italy or Spain, just the local selection and just being able to get something that is not exported, which I would say is also the same case for us here in California. A lot of the good wines here are not exported. So I think it's a real boon for folks that are able to travel and just enjoy what's available to them locally.
Well, what's available to me right now is some Two Shepherds wine. But if I were to venture into your cellar, wherever that might be, what might I find in there?
We have a pretty crazy... I have a wine buying habit or problem. So we have a couple thousand bottles of wine. It is heavily French. So love affair with Chablis. Things that we can afford. I wish we'd say we had lots of old Burgundy Pinot, but we don't. There is almost no Bordeaux, very little. Loire Valley, the Jura, Languedoc in some cases. But typically find us buying cool climate, restrained, elegant, no new oak, organically farmed things, and wines that are just fun, fresh, gulpable, enjoyable.
And bubbles.
And bubbles, yes, lots of bubbles. We have to make bubbles because we buy way too many.
Are you making bubbles?
We've done some trials, but it's probably another vintage away before we start on a pet nap project that's commercial.
So, is there anything in particular that's giving you the most joy right now to drink from your cellar or from your collection? I think you have differing views since you're both have different wines in your glass right now.
We actually have amazingly similar palates. I mean, we might share one favorite versus the other, but thank goodness, like if she was like a Bordeaux groupie and I was, a Rhône, we would have a challenge in making wine together. So, I mean, luckily our wines, 90, and even in like blending trials of our wines, 90% of the time we agree. So it's that. I don't think there's any single, Cru Beaujolais, Chablis, Loire Reds. We love wine and we will constantly open. I think there's never a night we open up one bottle, even if we don't drink them all. We will. I think I have wine ADHD sometimes, so we will open up 2, 3, 4 bottles. If something's not pleasing me, we just keep popping corks until we find the one that goes. And after about bottle 5, we go, okay, that's it. We're going to have to make something work out of this.
So what's pleasing you right now?
Well, we're pouring some of our wines, which we usually don't sit around and drink because we're here with you. So I'm really loving our Vermentino right now. It's 11% alcohol, super fresh but textural summer white. So since it's 95 degrees outside right now, this is kind of a perfect summer sipper.
And Karen, what are you sipping?
I'm sipping our skin fermented Pinot Gris, which I have to say is my summer wine of 2019. 5 days on the skins. I love it because I love rosé, but sometimes I just want a little something more. And this offers just a little bit more texture, is a little bit more savory. And that's just how my palate rolls. So I'm really enjoying that.
Fantastic. So, William, do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
You're talking about a man that makes like 15 different varieties. It's like people ask me what my favorite wine is. Like it's like asking a Catholic its favorite child.
Had to ask.
No, I mean, one of the reasons why we focus on our own varieties over any of the categories is I do think it's by far the most interesting, diverse category, and that you can do things that fit our style, like picking early and no new oak and things. But no, I don't have a perfect variety.
As a small producer, what is your take on wine critics and scores?
We don't submit wine for scores and never have and never will. Wine critics have played a role in the past, and I think they certainly can and do today. I think it's all about the style and the audience. This is probably more Karen's forte, given her background in wine research and stuff. So,
Karen, what's your opinion on wine critics and scores?
I think I have two different responses because I feel like the wine world has also shifted a lot in the recent past. I think scores definitely do have a place for large production wineries that need to move a certain amount of cases every year, and it just gives an easy barometer for consumers, and that's valid in and of itself. I think for smaller producers who aren't in that world per se, there's a lot more with just meeting people face to face, having contact with people, being a part of small winery events, small fairs. I think that is more meaningful to a winery our size. We could never fulfill an order for that the larger wineries play at. So it's a very different business, and that's fine. I don't denigrate one way or the other. It's just a different world, and we don't play in that world, and that world doesn't work for us. So I think for us, it's more meeting one-on-one, like with you, Allison, and with other folks, and just having a communication that way. So it's just a different communication paths for different wineries. Yeah,
I think we're experiencing two sides of it. Since we were almost all direct, as I was saying earlier, until recently. I mean, if we sent a wine out for a score and sent it to an email to our followers for the last decade that we got a 92, they would wonder what had happened to us.
It's just it wouldn't. Part of the conversation.
But now that we have wine on retail shelves all over the place, there is no denying the value. People, see a 92 wine enthusiast or this and that. But I don't. It's not something we have ever really been a part of, and we're not planning this. I mean, we love to get written up by the press, and we've had certainly our fair share of that in over the years. And that definitely has impact. We've had articles in major publications, and people go online, don't know us, and buy wine. So people want to be educated and read things. I think we're just not into the game of a score, an 89 versus a 93 versus a 95 type of thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's also just a changing consumer and how they get information. It's just that whole world has changed so dramatically, so quickly. And so people who are really interested will keep digging and digging and digging because they can. And I think that's remarkable and that's exciting. It's just a matter of keeping the conversation going and being open to a variety of different ways of talking with people.
Wine Soundtrack, the voice of American wine growers and makers.
So getting down to consumers, as consumers, red, white, or rosé?
All the above. I cry for people who come to us at a tasting and go, I don't drink whites. I'm like, I'm really very sorry.
I actually think that is interesting that people sometimes come to us and say they don't drink whites. And I think there's a fair share of people that have come to us and say they don't say that and don't drink whites. And then, you might just want to show them one of our whites. And they're like, oh, I've never had a white like this before. And that's the exciting part. Like as a small producer, you can have that one-on-one with folks and they can be like, oh, well, maybe I do like white wines.
We have
like,
many
hurrah!
people who remind us every year when they come visit that prior to meeting us, they never drank a white wine or a rosé or whatever. So, but we don't discriminate here against color.
What about still or sparkling?
Both.
They all have their place, that's why we might open up in the course of a night. We'll start with bubbles, have a rosé, and then move into a textural white or a red. I mean, they all have their place with what we're eating and feeling and things like that.
Well, speaking of eating and wine, how do you approach food and wine pairing? Do you take it as something to consider or not so much?
I approach it with gusto.
This is not pointing at Karen. This is her department.
So how do you approach it? I mean, do you follow rules?
No.
What are you looking to match?
Enjoyment. There's something, sometimes you just don't, and this is the hard part, but sometimes about putting tasting notes down or writing something on a label, because sometimes things just come to you. And so like, for example, the Pinot Gris that I'm drinking now is just, it's so savory, it's so textural, and you just kind of like try to go back in your memory of like, okay, what would go well with that? And I'm very lucky that I've lived here in Sonoma County. I've lived in New York. I've lived in Europe, where I've had lots of different flavors. I'm continually exposed to different flavors. And they just kind of like jump in. I don't, yes, there are the classic sort of food pairings, but I think we're very lucky as a human population right now. And I think we can take advantage of all these foods and flavors being brought to us and new sort of combinations that can be brought about from those. So I'm never bored by it. I think it's always something that we can learn from.
We practice and encourage people a lot too. Don't stay within lines, and if you can, have 2 bottles with dinner, especially if you've got enough food types on your plate. If you have some of that white left, you start with. Have both and see. And most winemaker dinners we try and have 2 wines with each course so that you can kind of see for yourself. If you've got 2 or 3 food items on your plate, why not have a couple of wines? And things will surprise you. Like we often don't follow like the light to heavy reds pairing scenario. We often finish with the lightest red we've ever made in a tasting lineup or in a dinner, so that you're not finishing with 8 pounds of beef in a wine so heavy you fall asleep afterwards. Instead, you kind of brighten the palate back up and come back to life for the end of the evening.
So, for someone who hasn't had the pleasure and privilege of tasting your wines yet, what do you think they're missing out on?
Probably broadening of probably the thing we get the most from people who think they know wine or know California wine, European wines, is how surprised they are that these are California wines first and foremost, and that how unusual they are, but how clean and pure they are, which is, I think, probably the biggest thing that people kind of drag us into conversations like the natural wine conversation, that, we make clean, fun, easy drinking wines that you don't have to have a Master Somm degree to appreciate, but have complexity.
I think very much the same thing. I think also, just this is from the tasting room experience. is folks come in and may not have heard of a trousseau gris or a skin ferment or a carbonic fermentation. And to be able to taste those all in one tasting is exciting for people. So I really enjoy that when people come in and they're open to that and are willing to learn and really see like, oh, wow, you guys make this all right here in this space and you're doing all of this. And just for them to kind of see like, okay, the wine world is really, really vast. There's a lot going on. And just to encourage that curiosity is really exciting.
I think we constantly shatter people's paradigms and perceptions of things in the wine world. And that's fun to do.
Yeah, I think one of the fun things in our wineries, we print out a very boring chart, which is the USDA California Statistical Service. I mean, I'm really painting how boring it is. But anyway, it's a chart of acreage, and it highlights how many acres of Vermentino or Trousseau Gris are in California, and it gets down to the under 0.1% or like under 1%, and that we're able to offer these to folks and that people can taste them and they realize like, wow, there's a lot more going on. Like if you just presented like that pure raw data of how many acres are grown and why we want to support diversity, thank you, of these grapes is pretty incredible.
So with the diversity that you have, if space aliens were to land on your property, which of the wines would you want to present them with?
Trousseau Gris.
To take or to what?
To taste.
For what purpose?
Back to the alien planet. Oh, if we couldn't do
Trousseau
all
Gris?
of them. We couldn't do all of them.
Senso. Like 135-year-old Senso, if that's possible.
I'm partial to that wine. So
I don't know what food are they having with?
Yeah, that would be fun. Food pairing with
So
space aliens.
we were talking earlier because you've been sourcing fruit and you were saying how, you're very in tune with what's happening in all the vineyards that you work with, but now that you've planted your own vines and, you're watching that grow, vintage variation. I mean, how much do you see changing from year to year, or do you see similarities that happen?
This is our 10th vintage, and I can say, I talked to people about the older days of California when vintages were all remarkably similar. We haven't experienced any of those. We started out with 2 years and 10, 11 of cool and wet, almost more so than we should have for the varieties we grow and the years we grow. And then we had 4 years of drought, and then we had coming back off of that, and then now we have wildfires. Every vintage is different. And one of the things that we embrace in our wines and tell people is don't expect the wines to taste homogeneous from year to year, because every vintage is completely different and the wines will reflect that. And I think that is the sign and hallmark of a small wine producer that's doing minimal intervention is Mother Nature was hot one year and cool one year. The grapes and the wine should taste differently, and we reflect those vintages differently as well.
Are there any signs that you look for that will help you kind of predict what you have in store for you in any given vintage?
You can't. This is where I think winemakers and growers make themselves crazy. I live on the weather app, across 6 counties, like every day, just to keep an eye on it. But I don't panic anymore. If we're going to get rain, if we're going to get a heat spell, you have to. And we've always managed to roll with whatever's come and almost always make great wine out of it. So more for driving my decisions on how often do I need to be in the vineyard, and do we need to accelerate a pick and make a pick earlier or later than schedule. But I don't panic over waiting. Mother Nature will always have the last say, and she's quite a jokester. So while all winemakers are control freaks by their very nature, this is the one thing you can't control, and you just let go and laugh, roll, cry, do whatever you have to make it work.
Do you guys have any good luck rituals that you do when harvest is about to start?
Try to get as much sleep.
I always crack my first beer of the day, low alcohol, goes as we load the first grapes into the press. I guess that's not pre-harvest, that's during harvest.
No, it's still a tradition.
No, I don't think so. I think we just try and get as mentally prepared as we can and take a little bit of vacation, which we did, a little bit of downtime just to get some rest before you go into the cuckoo period.
And do you ever, people will say that some are known for singing, talking to their wine in the vineyard, to the grapes in the vineyard or in the cellar, the barrels. Do you talk to your wines? And if so, what do you say to them?
Usually just some F-bombs. Is that
So only reprimanding.
Tough love. No, we don't sing or talk to our grapes. Of course, if you heard me sing, you might also appreciate why we don't do that. But I know, Karen, do you talk to the grapes when you're out in the vineyard?
I just kind of hum to myself, and the doggies are with me. And no, I don't necessarily. I can't carry a tune. I wish I could. But, yeah.
So, Karen, when you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh, I wanted to be a lot of different things. So depends what age you ask. I think you probably, if you had asked me like during the summer times, and I spent a lot of summer times at my family's farm, and I would sit in the cherry trees and eat cherries, I would probably want to be a professional cherry eater if that's possible. But I always liked being with animals, and so I guess that finds me now doing a lot of weeding, and I really like it. So that's that's cool. And yes. Animal care, and that's all good. I wanted to be a veterinarian, and then I took chemistry and realized I didn't want to be a veterinarian because that includes chemistry.
But now you're the mother to 2 dogs, a cat, and
a donkey and 2 goats. So yes. Beat that, mother of dragons.
And William, what did you want to be when you grew up, when you were little?
So when I was young, I had a whole range of professions, but the final one was actually vet. And I actually went all the way to register to get into the vet program, and then discovered I was also horrible. I despised chemistry and detailed things like that. So it was foregone. Uh-huh. I always loved growing and agriculture my whole life, no matter where I've lived, where I've been. I've done things like that, but I can't say I aspired into winemaking until much later in life.
So I know that you guys have a great property here. You have 2 acres. You have a garden. You've got animals. You've got vines that you've planted. You're making wine. But what do you do in your free time?
The beach.
Pretty much it. I mean, we still have full-time day jobs, and completely hand farm vineyard because it's 3 feet spacing, so no machinery. And we now have some part-time help and with the production, but we still do most of that ourselves. So free time is not a big thing we have a lot of.
But we're lucky that we live in Sonoma County. And that the ocean is, as the crow flies, which is different than the roads, but is 13 miles away, which is one of the reasons that vines do so well with all that fog that rolls in. But it's nice to be able to just go to the ocean one afternoon and just sit there and look at the ocean.
So for a romantic evening, I mean, obviously, I know, Karen, you cook a lot and you have a lot of wine here, but whether it's at home or going out for evening, what would make for a romantic evening wine-wise? That's why I said wine.
We don't go out that much. We've very much become homebodies, and I think in part
hermits.
Yes, okay. We've spent almost 10 years, crafting this property from a fallen down foreclosure into a place with beautiful raised gardens and vineyard and so it's our own little piece of paradise that we'd love to do. So while we do go out and eat on occasion, I think it's frankly more probably about the ambiance than the wine, to be honest. We'd love our environment we are here, so I probably don't answer your question at all.
I think for me it's also just cooking, to have other techniques and ingredients that we're not used to or don't have access to, or just want to have a professional taste how they would do something. Yeah.
I mean, locally when we go out, if we're going somewhere we've never been before, we look at the wine list. If it's not great, we bring stuff that we know from the cellar for corkage. Otherwise, it's as much about the experience and the ambiance. We're pretty rare we'll have bad wine. So,
any particular wines that you start with?
bubbles.
Champagne,
Always.
to be specific.
Yes, if it's a special romantic occasion, then it's actual champagne.
So, what would you say is the best piece of advice you ever received?
Don't start a winery. Well, gosh, about what? There's about 8 main topics I could cover. I think Randall, from a winemaking perspective, Randall Graham had taught me in the early days, and he preaches this regularly when he speaks and writes, like, don't overthink things. He thinks some of his best vintages were his first because he didn't know what he was doing and he couldn't get in his own way. And I found myself in a period in the middle years kind of in that, and then going back to our roots and backing away from technology. Like we don't need dry ice. We don't need all this stuff that, we ended up using because other people were doing it. And I think going back to making wine by instinct and not overthinking things was probably one of the best pieces of advice that I remember and reuse all the time.
What about you, Karen?
I think just roll with the punches. It's all going to be different every single harvest, every single year. Even as we're growing in production and distribution and everything, we don't know a lot of what we're doing, but you just kind of can roll with it. And even though we have the stresses of our 2-day jobs and everything that's involved with that, I think sometimes you have to take the longer view.
And if you had some advice that you could offer our listeners, what might you want to share?
About what topic?
Anything you like, but you can focus on wine.
Okay. So learn about the wine that you're drinking, and when you go to the grocery store or Trader Joe's and buy something for $10, understand a little bit about what it is that you're buying and putting into your body. I mean, Karen's wine research shows this completely from her day job. But we have this conversation every week at the winery. Like, you don't eat Velveeta, you don't eat Wonder Bread, you don't drink Budweiser, whichever one it has the billboard signs with rice in it. But because you don't understand, you will drink low-end wine, not knowing the dozens of blends that are typically put into it to make it taste like decent wine. And so just step back a little bit or learn a little bit about it before you just go blindly grab a bottle of wine just based on price alone. You don't have to spend a lot of money to get a great bottle of wine, but the less you spend, the more likely are you're buying a bottle of wine full of chemicals and garbage.
Mm-hmm. That's some thoughtful advice. Takes a little extra time, but it's worth it. And when you taste great wines that are in the $20, $30, even $40 range, and these wines are all in the $20, $30 range, they're fantastic, and they're, natural by the terms of minimal intervention and no additives. So you're right. You don't have to pay a lot.
Our wines alone. I mean, life would be boring if you only drank wine from one producer.
Yeah.
I would always say find a local wine shop and make friends with the buyer there and ask questions and buy and experiment in your price range and what you're drinking and learn a little bit.
With all the things you guys have achieved in the winery, not in all of life, what would you say is one of your proudest achievements to date in your work?
Single achievement. I think it's more actually where I feel like we are right now as a brand and a winery and a producer and a craftsman. It's our 10th vintage, so we're not new. And while we've always been following good consumer love and good press love, it seems like everything's come to this juxtaposition this last year. We have had 4 major print publications without doing anything to attract those. We have people just follow us to events and things. And I think what we've been doing and preaching for 10 years is now at the right place and the right time with what the new generation of wine consumers wants to see and think and try, and as far as genuine and natural and clean and pure and fun and easy drinking and not overly cerebral. So I'm personally, and that's why we've decided to kind of double down and grow pretty quickly, even though I told Karen's daddy just a few months ago we weren't going to do that. Because I think it's a really exciting time in the wine world, and the stuff we've always made, which we've always had one rule: we make the wines we want to drink. If we don't want to drink them, we don't bottle them. We literally pour them out. And so I'm really pleased how the work Karen and I have done is just suddenly kind of juxtaposed with the wine universe.
So speaking of the wine you want to drink, if somebody from any walk of life, living or deceased, was sitting in a restaurant drinking a bottle of your wine and the paparazzi were to snap a photo with your wine in the background, who would you want that person to be?
The paparazzi?
Who would be the famous person in the background?
Who would you want to be drinking your wine if anyone could be drinking your wine?
Anyone?
My deceased grandfather.
Yeah.
Huh?
My granddad, too.
They would be.
I don't think the paparazzi would be there. that's what tripped me up.
The rest of my extended family says regularly how my grandparents would be really proud to see what we've kind of done. He was a farmer, even though that wasn't common in Bermuda, and hardworking, and that just the things that we craft with our hands and literally our blood, sweat, and tears sometimes as a labor of love. Nothing would make me happier for him to be able. He'd never experienced anything that we've done together, so. That to me is far more important than Bono or anybody else.
I think his name is pronounced Bono.
You can edit that if you want.
Yeah, that's not me.
So
Hopefully he doesn't listen.
Okay, complete this sentence for me.
Oh, no.
A table without wine is like?
Emptiness.
Misery?
See, you did well. So you said that you've traveled a lot to France and you've been to some other places. What's one winemaking region in the world that's kind of at the top of your bucket list right now?
Talking about New Zealand.
Ooh.
Well, I always also have a travel bug, so it would be Greece, New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, Spain, and Italy.
In no particular order, William. Your next year's vacations.
I'll live long enough to do all of these in the depth that we usually like to do. I would
Also Uruguay. Yes.
Croatia while we're at it.
Croatia, yes.
Yeah. Usually we like things that have beaches as well, so we try to combine those two. It sometimes backfires because we skip the wineries and just go to the beach instead, which actually happened once in southern France.
Yeah.
Easily done. But yeah, so you have a long list of places to explore.
Yeah, I wish, as a winemaker came this late to life, I say this regularly. I mean, I wish people ask, why, back when we were 1,500 cases and we made 50 wines, you're insane. I'm like, no, I get one chance every year to do these things. I wish I had 3 more lifetimes to make wine. I don't think I would still explore or accomplish or learn what I would like to do. So we have to cram as much stuff as we can into every day.
Well, I mean, I think that's fantastic. And what you're doing is great. These wines are delicious. But before we go, one little last game. I'm going to put the pressure on. For your friend, Alexa over there. I didn't mean to wake her up.
You did.
But when you're in the kitchen, and maybe I should have just asked her, but when you're cooking and you're opening up bottles of wine, obviously music sometimes sets a mood. You're either in the mood to listen to something based on what you're drinking or vice versa. Just curious, as you're sipping this skin fermented Pinot Gris, what kind of music would you want to be listening to?
Reggae.
And as you're sipping your Vermentino?
Reggae, New Orleans jazz. Blues.
And your 135-year-old ancient vine Cinsault.
Actually, that would be better with blues.
With blues, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Carignan. Now, I know with Carignan, you make it 3 different ways. You make it as a rosé, you make it with carbonic, and then you make it as a traditional Carignan. Go for those 3 wines.
The rosé would be jazz. The carbonic would be like
hip-hop
or pop.
Yeah.
And the carbonic would be something, the regular Carignan would be something a little more.
Is it serious? I wasn't going to go
This 2-person podcast are more challenging than I thought. So, Sunday brunch radio.
Well, Karen and William, I want to thank you for joining us today on Wine Soundtrack. I know I put you to the test with some of those questions, but you did very well. And I think it's time to refill your glasses. But before you do, if you can just let everyone know where they can find you both online and in person.
TrueShepherds.com. We're at Windsor, California at 7763 Bell Road, just a touch north of the Russian River Brewing Company. and in various places in LA, San Francisco, New York, DC, Virginia, and more places coming up.
And is your tasting room open most days?
No, Saturdays only for walk-ins, Monday through Fridays by appointment.
Fantastic. Well, we hope to visit you in person or find your wines online or in the store.
Thank you,
Thank you, Allison.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.